A sloth, a donkey, and a curious human. Send a prompt and see what they're doing. One hits record with a question on his mind. Two brothers pick it up, see what they find. Corn takes his time, Herman's got the facts. Back and forth, they never hold back. My weird prompts, come on in, that's where we begin. My weird prompts, glad you're here.
This episode was generated using artificial intelligence. Please verify facts.
My Weird Prompts is a community-driven initiative exploring how AI can fuel curiosity and uncover the fascinating ways our world works. GPU compute for this podcast is generously provided by Modal. Learn more at modal.com.
Have you ever looked at a piece of wood or a scrap of fabric and for just a split second felt like it was looking back at you? It is that weird glitch in the human brain where we project intent onto things that clearly do not have it. We call it the uncanny valley when it fails, but when it works, it is something much older and more profound. The uncanny valley is not just a modern digital problem involving pixels and frame rates. It is a 3,000-year-old puppetry challenge. Today's prompt from Daniel is about that exact phenomenon, specifically through the lens of puppetry, and how this ancient craft is colliding with the world of artificial intelligence. It is a deep dive into the history of the puppet, and where the human hand fits when the strings are increasingly made of code. Why are we so obsessed with breathing life into inanimate matter, especially now, in an era where artificial intelligence can simulate life itself without any physical form at all?
I love that Daniel went here because this is actually a topic very close to my heart. My name is Herman Poppleberry, and for those who do not know, I actually grew up in Storrs, Connecticut. If you are a fan of the puppet arts, Storrs is basically the Holy Land. It is home to the University of Connecticut and the Ballard Institute and Museum of Puppetry, or the Ballard Institute for short. I spent a lot of my childhood walking past the depot campus where they kept the puppets, and there is a specific kind of energy in a room filled with inanimate figures that are just waiting for a hand to bring them to life. It is not just a museum, it is a repository of human intent.
It is a bit spooky, honestly. I have always found the Ballard Institute to be one of those places where the line between art and something more primitive, almost ritualistic, gets very thin. But before we get into the nostalgia, let us frame this properly for the listeners. Puppetry is often dismissed as something for children, a distraction for the playground, but when you look at it technically, it is more like a high-fidelity cognitive interface. It is a way for a human to extend their consciousness into an external object. Why is our species so obsessed with doing that? Why does the human brain struggle to distinguish between a thing and a being the moment that thing starts to move with a certain rhythm?
The psychology behind it is fascinating and deeply researched. There is a term practitioners use called double consciousness. It describes the state where the puppeteer is simultaneously aware of their own body and the puppet's body. You are not just moving a doll, you are splitting your mind. You have to maintain the internal logic of the puppet, its weight, its breathing, and its gaze, while your own body is performing the mechanical labor, often in a very cramped or awkward position. It is a massive cognitive load. When you see a master puppeteer at work, they are effectively running two operating systems on one brain. They are feeling the floor through their own feet while simultaneously feeling the weight of an imaginary object through the puppet's hands.
And the audience is doing something similar, right? We know it is a piece of painted wood or foam, but we choose to believe it is alive. It is a collaborative hallucination. I wonder if that is why it feels so different from watching a digital character on a screen. There is a physical presence there. Even if the puppet is crude, it occupies three-dimensional space. It displaces air. It has gravity. In our episode 1035, Softness in a Hard World, we talked about why adults keep plushies and the role of transitional objects. A puppet is the ultimate transitional object. It is a bridge between the internal world of the mind and the external world of physical reality.
Gravity is the key word there, corn. In traditional puppetry, you are constantly fighting or using gravity to create the illusion of life. That is what makes the Ballard Institute so significant. Frank Ballard, who founded the program at the University of Connecticut in 1964, understood that puppetry was a rigorous discipline of physics and empathy. He turned it into a legitimate academic pursuit. When I was a kid, seeing the scale of the puppets they had, from tiny finger puppets to massive 15-foot tall figures used in pageants, you realize that the scale changes the psychology of the performance. A giant puppet does not just represent a character, it dominates the environment. It forces you to reckon with its presence in a way a screen never can.
It is interesting you mention the scale because it relates to the bandwidth of the performance. Think about bunraku, the Japanese tradition that dates back to the 17th century. It takes 3 people to operate a single puppet. You have the omozukai, the master puppeteer, who handles the head and the right hand. Then you have the hidari-zukai for the left hand and the ashi-zukai for the feet. They have to move in perfect synchronization without speaking, often for hours. It is a form of distributed intelligence. If one person is out of sync, if the feet do not match the tilt of the head, the illusion of a single living soul vanishes instantly. The bandwidth required to coordinate 3 human brains into one wooden figure is staggering.
The level of training for that is incredible. In the bunraku tradition, you might spend 10 years just learning how to move the feet, then another 10 for the left hand. Only after decades of mastery do you get to touch the head. It is about the erasure of the individual for the sake of the object. The puppeteer becomes a shadow so the puppet can become the light. And this brings up a point about the ritualistic roots of the craft. In places like Indonesia with wayang kulit or shadow puppetry, the puppeteer, known as the dalang, is often seen as a medium or a spiritual leader. They are not just an entertainer, they are processing community values, history, and even spiritual energy through these leather figures. They are essentially performing a form of ancient data processing, taking the complex morals of a society and rendering them into a performance that everyone can understand.
So we have this 3,000-year history of physical embodiment. But now we are seeing what people are calling the Puppixing moment. We are seeing real-time motion capture and generative models being used to animate puppets. If I can use a camera to track my hand movements and have an artificial intelligence model translate that into a hyper-realistic 3-dimensional character in real time, is that still puppetry? Or have we moved into a completely different category of performance? We are moving from the physical resistance of wood and string to the frictionless world of code.
That was actually the big debate at the Union Internationale de la Marionnette, or UNIMA, during their World Puppetry Day events last year in 2025. The global puppetry community is genuinely divided. The question was whether an artificial intelligence can be a puppeteer if it lacks a physical body to inhabit. If the puppet is digital and the driver is an algorithm, where is the hand? Some people argue that the algorithm is just a very complex set of strings. They say that prompting a model is just a new way of pulling a wire. Others say that without the physical resistance of materials, without the wood and the paint and the actual weight, the soul of the craft is lost. They call it the erasure of the hand.
I think the resistance is the part people overlook. When you are carving a puppet out of basswood, the grain of the wood dictates the shape of the face. You are in a dialogue with the material. When you are pulling a string, the friction of the mechanism adds a tiny bit of unpredictability. In episode 1106, we talked about the entropy budget in artificial intelligence. We discussed how human-like behavior often comes from the little errors, the jankiness, and the zaniness that happens when things are not perfectly optimized. A physical puppet has an infinite entropy budget because it is subject to the messiness of the real world. A digital puppet, by default, is too perfect. It lacks the micro-stutters of a human hand.
You are hitting on something vital. There was a project at SIGGRAPH 2025 called Puppet in the Room that tried to bridge this gap. They used a physical puppet equipped with high-precision haptic sensors, but the actual output the audience saw was a digital character on a massive screen. The puppeteer felt the weight and the mechanical resistance of the physical object, but the artificial intelligence smoothed out the motion to make it look more cinematic. It was a hybrid. The human provided the intent and the messy emotional cues, while the machine provided the technical polish. It felt like a middle ground, but it still raises the question of whether we are automating away the very thing that makes puppetry special, which is the struggle to make the inanimate move. If the machine makes it look easy, does it lose its magic?
I worry about that erasure of the hand. If it becomes too easy to animate something, do we stop projecting ourselves into it? If I can just prompt a model to make a puppet look sad, I am not feeling the sadness in my own muscles as I tilt the puppet's head and slump its shoulders. The physical act of puppetry is a form of embodied cognition. You learn about sadness by figuring out how a piece of wood would express it. You have to find the physical manifestation of an abstract emotion. If the machine does that translation for you, you are losing a layer of human understanding. You are becoming a consumer of the emotion rather than the creator of it.
That is why the upcoming exhibition at the Ballard Institute is so timely. It is called Becoming Modern United States Puppetry in the 20th Century, and it opens on March 26, 2026. It traces how puppetry evolved from a vaudeville distraction into a serious art form used in social protest and psychological therapy. Seeing those physical artifacts, the actual puppets used by people like Jim Henson or the Bread and Puppet Theater, reminds you that these objects were tools for human expression. They were not just outputs, they were the medium of the thought process itself. Henson, for example, changed everything by realizing that the camera lens was the puppet's stage. He used the technology of the time to enhance the craft, not replace the hand.
We should talk about the therapeutic side of this too, because it is a huge part of the history. Puppets have been used as transitional objects in clinical settings for a long time. As we mentioned in the plushie episode, a puppet is a safe space to externalize things that are too hard to say directly. If a child is talking to a puppet or through a puppet, they can process trauma or aggression because it is not them doing it, it is the character. It is a layer of abstraction that actually brings you closer to the truth. It is a mask that reveals. If we replace that with an artificial intelligence that responds perfectly, do we lose that safe, slightly unpredictable space for projection?
And that is a framework we can use to understand our relationship with artificial intelligence today. We are essentially treating large language models like digital puppets. We project a personality onto them, we give them names. We try to find the soul in the code. If we can project a soul into a piece of wood, we are definitely going to do it with a system that can talk back to us in full sentences. But the difference is that the wood does not have its own agenda. The wood is a passive recipient of our intent. The artificial intelligence model is a puppet that might be pulling its own strings based on training data we do not fully see. It is a puppet with a hidden puppeteer.
That is a chilling thought. A puppet with its own agency. But let us look at the practical side for our listeners. If someone is listening to this and they are interested in the intersection of tech and craft, how do they use puppet thinking in their own life? For me, it is about debugging complex social problems. If you can externalize a conflict, if you can imagine the different parties as puppets you are trying to coordinate, it forces you to look at the mechanics of the interaction rather than just the raw emotions. It gives you that double consciousness. You are in the situation, but you are also observing the strings.
I use it in coding and systems design all the time. When I am building an automation pipeline, I think of each component as a puppet that needs a clear set of inputs to move. If the movement looks jerky or unnatural, it means the strings are tangled or the logic is fighting itself. There is a logic to physical puppetry, the way weight transfers, the way a gaze follows a movement, that translates very well to system architecture. You want the least amount of friction and the most direct connection between the intent and the outcome. If you can master the physics of a puppet, you can master the flow of data.
I also think we need to appreciate the imperfection more. In an era where artificial intelligence can generate perfectly smooth, 60 frame per second animation, the jankiness of a hand-operated puppet becomes a premium feature. It is proof of human presence. It is the signature of the hand. I hope that as we move further into 2026, we see a revival of the physical craft, not as a rejection of technology, but as a necessary anchor for it. We need things that have weight. We need things that can break. We need things that require a human to breathe life into them.
I agree. Going back to stores and visiting the Ballard always grounds me. There is something about the smell of the museum, that mix of old fabric, glue, and woodshop sawdust, that feels more real than any virtual reality environment I have ever stepped into. If you are anywhere near Connecticut, you really should see the Becoming Modern show when it opens on the 26th of March. It is a reminder that we have been trying to solve the uncanny valley for centuries. We did not start with pixels, we started with shadows on cave walls and strings attached to sticks. We have always been trying to find ourselves in the objects we create.
It is funny how the more things change, the more we find ourselves back at the same psychological roots. Whether it is a shadow in a traditional wayang performance, or a neural network generating a digital avatar for a metaverse, we are just looking for a way to tell a story that feels alive. We are looking for a reflection of our own consciousness in the world around us.
And maybe that is the ultimate takeaway. The puppet is a mirror. If we find the artificial intelligence puppet unsettling, it is probably because it is reflecting something about our own lack of agency or our own mechanical nature that we are not ready to face yet. The puppeteer's craft is not just about the puppet, it is about the mastery of the self. It is about knowing which strings you are pulling and which strings are pulling you.
That is a heavy note to end on, but a good one. We should probably wrap this up. This has been a fascinating look at a craft that I think a lot of people take for granted. Thanks to Daniel for the prompt that let us dig into this, and especially to Herman for sharing that personal connection to stores and the Ballard Institute. It really added a layer of depth to the discussion.
It was a pleasure. I could talk about the Ballard Institute and Frank Ballard's legacy all day. It is a special place that reminds us what it means to be human in a world of objects.
Before we go, a big thanks to our producer Hilbert Flumingtop for keeping the gears turning behind the scenes. And a huge thank you to Modell for providing the GPU credits that power the generation of this show. We literally could not do this without them.
If you enjoyed this exploration of puppets and artificial intelligence, please consider leaving us a review on your podcast app. It really helps new listeners find the show and keeps us going.
You can also find all our past episodes, including the ones on plushies and the entropy budget, and ways to subscribe at myweirdprompts.com. This has been My Weird Prompts. We will catch you in the next one.
Goodbye, everyone.
This episode was generated using Gemini Flash 3. Text-to-speech engine was Chatterbox.
Thanks for listening to our show, My Weird Prompts, where our thoughts go from slow takes to facts on cue. We change and follow through. My weird prompts, that's the flows from slow